Welcome to Luxury Empire Stories.
The scratching of the heavy Mont Blanc pen against the thick cotton-pressed divorce papers sounded like the final heartbeat of a 10-year lie. Donna didn't weep. She didn't scream. Across the polished mahogany table, her soon-to-be ex-husband, Richard, checked his platinum Rolex, his mind already drifting to the 24-year-old mistress waiting in his idling Bentley downstairs. He thought he was walking away with the lion's share of their assets, leaving Donna with a modest, insulting settlement and a broken spirit. He thought he had won the war. But as Donna slid the signed documents across the desk, neither of them knew that this quiet, unassuming signature was the absolute master key unlocking a staggering, multi-million-dollar secret. The rain in Seattle that Tuesday afternoon was relentless, lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Pendleton and associates with a kind of violent indifference. Donna Caldwell sat perfectly still in an oversized leather chair that felt more like a tribunal seat than office furniture. She stared at the stack of documents separating her from the man she had promised to love for the rest of her life. Richard Sterling sat opposite her. He was a man who wore his ambition like expensive cologne, overpowering and impossible to ignore. A high-profile real estate developer who had built his empire on aggressive acquisitions and ruthless charm, Richard looked entirely in his element in the cold, sterile environment of a corporate law office. He was flanked by Arthur Pendleton, a bulldog of an attorney whose hourly rate could finance a small car. Beside Donna sat Sarah Jenkins, a junior family lawyer Donna had retained because she simply couldn't afford anyone else. Sarah looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with her legal pad. "If you sign this, Donna," Sarah whispered, leaning in so the men across the table couldn't hear, "you are walking away from the Mercer Island estate. You are walking away from the joint investment portfolios, the Aspen timeshare, and any claim to the Sterling Development Group. $150,000, and keeping your antique restoration business is pennies compared to what you're entitled to. We can fight this. He cheated on you, repeatedly." Donna looked down at her hands. They were calloused from years of sanding wood, polishing brass, and restoring broken things to their former glory. She had spent a decade trying to restore Richard too, trying to fix the cracks in his ego, polishing his image, standing quietly in the background while he took the spotlight. She was exhausted. The thought of dragging this divorce through the courts for another 2 years, enduring Richard's gaslighting, his character assassinations, and the public humiliation of his very public affair with Chloe Beaumont, a lifestyle influencer barely out of college, made Donna physically nauseous. "I just want it to be over, Sarah," Donna replied, her voice barely above a whisper, but steady. "I don't want his money. I don't want the house we bought together because it never felt like a home. I just want my name back, and I want peace." Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table. He offered a smile that didn't reach his cold, grey eyes. "Listen to your lawyer, Donna, or don't. But let's be realistic. You brought nothing into this marriage financially. I built the company. I bought the assets. This settlement is generous, considering your lack of contribution." It was a lie, of course. When Richard was just starting out, drowning in debt and facing bankruptcy, it was Donna who had worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. It was Donna who had co-signed his first major business loan. But Richard possessed a unique talent for rewriting history to suit his narrative. Donna didn't argue. She didn't remind him of the nights she stayed up balancing his books, or the time she sold her late mother's jewelry so he could make payroll. She just reached for the pen. "Sign here, Mrs. Sterling," Arthur Pendleton said, his voice dripping with condescension as he tapped a manicured finger on the dotted line. "Initial here, and the decree absolute will be filed by Friday." Donna gripped the pen. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, a suffocating mix of grief and an odd, terrifying lightness. She signed her name, Donna Caldwell, not Sterling. Caldwell. She signed the second page, then the third. With every stroke of the pen, Richard's posture relaxed. A smug, victorious smirk played on his lips. As Donna handed the paperwork back to Pendleton, Richard stood up, buttoning his tailored Tom Ford suit jacket. "It's for the best, Donna," Richard said smoothly, slipping his phone into his pocket as a text from Chloe illuminated the screen. "You were never really built for the kind of life I'm heading toward. Take the settlement. Buy yourself a nice little condo in the suburbs. Focus on your little hobby shop." Donna stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her plain wool skirt. She looked Richard dead in the eye, stripping away the intimidation he had held over her for a decade. "Goodbye, Richard," she said softly. She turned and walked out of the glass-walled conference room. She didn't look back. She didn't see Richard celebrating with his lawyer. She just walked into the Seattle rain, entirely unaware that her refusal to fight for Richard's millions was the exact maneuver that would soon secure her own billions. 3 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Donna's new reality was a far cry from the sprawling, gated estate on Mercer Island. She had signed a lease on a cramped second-floor walk-up in Ballard, a neighborhood in northwestern Seattle that smelled permanently of salt water, roasted coffee, and damp pine. The apartment was old. The hardwood floors sloped slightly toward the window, and the radiator clanked violently in the middle of the night. But as Donna stood in the center of the tiny living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes, she felt a profound sense of safety. No one was going to come through the door and criticize the way she dressed. No one was going to complain that the dinner wasn't plated beautifully enough for guests. She poured herself a cup of cheap drip coffee and sat cross-legged on the floor, opening a box labeled Dad's Study, Fragile. Donna's father, Harrison Caldwell, had died 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack. He was a brilliant, eccentric, and deeply chaotic geologist who had spent his life chasing geological anomalies across North America. He was a man who loved rocks more than people, and while Donna loved him dearly, he had been a terrible provider. When he died, he left behind a small mountain of debt, a cluttered house, and a garage full of core samples. Richard had been furious when Harrison died. He had been forced to pay for the funeral, an act of charity he never let Donna forget. "Your family is a financial black hole, Donna," Richard used to say, whenever she dared to ask for anything. Donna pulled back the bubble wrap and lifted out an old, heavy cedar chest. It was locked, but Donna had kept the small brass key on her keyring for 5 years. She inserted the key, turned it, and popped the lid. The smell of pipe tobacco and old paper wafted into the room, bringing a sudden, sharp tear to her eye. Inside were Harrison's leather-bound field journals, pages and pages of erratic handwriting, sketches of topographical maps, and mineral analysis charts. Beneath the journals lay a scattering of personal items, a pocket watch, a compass, and a thick, sealed manila envelope. Donna frowned, pulling the envelope out. It was addressed to her. Donna Caldwell, care of Harrison Caldwell. The return address was a law firm in Calgary, Alberta, Roth and Associates. Donna looked at the postmark. It was dated nearly 3 years ago. It must have been delivered to her father's old P.O. box, forwarded to the Mercer Island house by a confused clerk, and then carelessly tossed into a storage box by Richard's housekeeping staff during one of his obsessive home reorganizations. She had never seen it. With trembling fingers, Donna broke the seal. Inside was a dense, multi-page legal document and a cover letter printed on heavy stock paper. "Dear Miss Caldwell, we are writing to you in your capacity as the sole heir and executor of the estate of Harrison Caldwell. As you may be aware, your late father held the deed to a 4,000-acre parcel of undeveloped land in the northern sector of the Canadian Shield, known locally as the Blackwood Tract. For the past several years, we have attempted to contact you regarding the status of this property. Recent geological surveys conducted by adjacent mining conglomerates have indicated significant anomalies on your father's parcel. We urge you to contact our offices immediately upon receipt of this letter to discuss the tax implications and the preliminary acquisition inquiries we have received. Sincerely, David Roth, Esquire. Donna stared at the paper. She remembered the Blackwood Tract. Her father used to talk about it when she was a little girl. He had bought it for pennies in the late 1980s, convinced there was something special beneath the frozen, barren dirt. Her mother had wept over the wasted money. Richard had literally laughed out loud when he saw the deed during the probate process, deeming the land worthless frozen mud and refusing to even pay the minimal property taxes on it, telling Donna to let the Canadian government seize it. Had the government seized it? The letter was 3 years old. Donna scrambled for her phone, her heart suddenly racing. She looked at the time. It was 1 p.m. in Seattle, which meant it was 2 p.m. in Calgary. She dialed the international number printed at the top of the letterhead. Roth and Associates, a receptionist answered. Yes, hello. My name is Donna Caldwell. I'm calling for David Roth. I know it's a long shot, but I received a letter from him. A very old letter. There was a pause, a click of keyboard keys, and then a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Miss Caldwell? Donna Caldwell, please hold, do not hang up. I am patching you through to Mr. Roth's direct line immediately. The hold music didn't even have a chance to play a full measure before the line clicked and a deep, frantic voice came through the speaker. Miss Caldwell? Is this actually Donna Caldwell? Yes, Mr. Roth. I'm sorry for the delay. I just found your letter in a box of my father's things. Miss Caldwell, where have you been? David Roth interrupted, his voice a mixture of absolute relief and sheer disbelief. We have had private investigators looking for you for 2 years. We tried serving notices to your residence in Mercer Island, but your husband's legal team repeatedly blocked our inquiries, stating you were indisposed and returning our correspondence to sender. Donna gripped the edge of her cheap kitchen counter. Richard. He had intercepted the letters. He had deliberately kept her in the dark, likely assuming it was more debt collectors coming after her father's estate, treating her mail like a nuisance to be swatted away. I'm no longer married, Mr. Roth. My divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago. The decree absolute was signed and processed. The silence on the other end of the line was so profound, Donna thought the call had dropped. Mr. Roth, your divorce is completely finalized? Your ex-husband has no legal claim to your current or future assets? Yes, I signed a clean break order. I took a lump sum, and we waived all rights to each other's future properties or discoveries. My lawyer made sure of it. Donna's voice shook. Mr. Roth, what is this about? Did the government seize the land? Do I owe back taxes? David Roth let out a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. Miss Caldwell, your father was not a crazy old man. He was a visionary. The Blackwood Tract wasn't seized. I have been paying the property taxes out of a trust we set up to protect the asset while we searched for you. Because, Miss Caldwell, the land is not barren. Donna closed her eyes, imagining the frozen Canadian wilderness her father loved so much. What's on it? It's not what is on it. It's what is beneath it, Roth explained, his tone shifting into a serious, professional cadence. 3 years ago, an independent survey confirmed what your father suspected. The Blackwood Tract sits directly on top of the largest, highest-grade vein of lithium and rare earth neodymium ever discovered in North America. Donna blinked, struggling to process the words. Lithium? Like for batteries? Like for every electric vehicle, smartphone, and renewable energy grid on the planet, Miss Caldwell. In the current global market, a domestic supply of this magnitude is the holy grail. We have spent the last 2 years fending off aggressive, hostile buyout attempts from Chinese tech conglomerates, American energy sectors, and private equity firms. Buyout attempts? Donna whispered, her legs suddenly feeling weak. She slid down the front of the kitchen cabinets until she was sitting on the linoleum floor. How much is the land worth? Roth cleared his throat. I have a standing, binding offer on my desk right now from a coalition backed by the Canadian government and an American EV manufacturer. They want to buy the land and the mineral rights outright. "How much?" she repeated, her voice cracking. She thought of the $150,000 settlement Richard had sneered at her with. She thought of her struggling antique business. Maybe this land was worth $1 million. Maybe $2 million. Enough to buy a real house. Enough to breathe. $450 million, Miss Caldwell, Roth said. The silence in Donna's apartment was deafening. The ticking of the cheap wall clock seemed to slow down. The sound of the Seattle rain hitting the window faded to white noise. "Excuse me?" Donna gasped. $450 million USD. And frankly, my financial analysts believe that's a low ball offer. If we structure this as a licensing deal where you retain ownership of the land and lease the mining rights, we are looking at generational wealth. Billions over the next 2 decades. Donna dropped the phone. It clattered against the linoleum. She stared blankly at the wall, her mind fracturing into 1,000 pieces and painfully reassembling itself. $450 million. If she had stayed married to Richard, half of it would have been his. Under Washington state's community property laws, any asset realized during the marriage, even an inheritance if commingled, could have been fiercely contested by a man with unlimited legal resources. If Richard had known, if he hadn't been so blinded by his own arrogance, his affair with Chloe and his utter disdain for Donna's father, he would have dragged the divorce out for years to sink his claws into this fortune. Instead, he had rushed the paperwork. He had demanded a clean break to protect his own paltry real estate empire. He had handed Donna the keys to the kingdom while patting himself on the back for stealing the village. Donna picked the phone back up. Her hands were no longer shaking. A cold, crystalline clarity had washed over her. "Mr. Roth," Donna said, her voice entirely changed. The quiet, submissive wife who had walked out of Arthur Pendleton's office was dead. "I'm going to need you to fly to Seattle." 72 hours later, David Roth was sitting in the parlor of the presidential suite at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle. He had flown in on a chartered Gulf Stream, bringing with him a senior partner from the wealth management division of Goldman Sachs and a corporate structuring specialist from Skadden Arps. Donna sat across from them, sipping sparkling water. She wore a simple navy blazer and dark jeans, a stark contrast to the 3 men in bespoke Italian suits, but the energy in the room completely gravitated toward her. The timid woman who had surrendered her life in Arthur Pendleton's office was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating pragmatist who had spent the last 3 days reading every financial document her father had ever hoarded. "The Canadian government is terrified of this asset falling into the wrong geopolitical hands, Donna," David Roth explained, laying a thick, leather-bound portfolio on the glass table. "That is our leverage. We don't sell the land. We lease the mining rights to the North American Coalition. They shoulder the entire overhead of the extraction, the labor, and the infrastructure." "And my yield?" Donna asked, her voice steady. William Hastings, the silver-haired Goldman Sachs executive, leaned forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "We have structured a royalty agreement based on the current and projected market value of battery-grade lithium carbonate and neodymium, including the upfront signing bonus for exclusive rights. Your initial liquid injection will be roughly $120 million USD by the end of the month. Annually, based on conservative extraction yields, you will gross between $85 million and $110 million for the next 30 years. Donna took a slow breath. The numbers were so large they felt abstract, like coordinates on a map rather than money in a bank. "I have 2 conditions," Donna said, setting her glass down. "First, complete anonymity. My name does not appear on any public registry, press release, or corporate filing. We bury the ownership behind a labyrinth of blind trusts and shell corporations." "Easily done," the Skadden attorney nodded. "We will establish the Harrison Vanguard Trust based in Delaware, layered beneath a holding company in the Cayman Islands. To the outside world, the Blackwood tract is owned by a faceless private equity consortium. Second, Donna continued, her eyes narrowing slightly, I want a dedicated intelligence team monitoring the Seattle commercial real estate market, specifically the Sterling Development Group. David Roth paused, his pen hovering over his legal pad. Your ex-husband's firm. Richard is arrogant, but he is also heavily over-leveraged, Donna stated flatly. For a decade, she had secretly balanced his ledgers, subtly steering him away from disastrous, ego-driven investments. Without her quietly fixing his blind spots, she knew exactly what he would do. He just broke ground on a $300 million luxury high-rise in Bellevue called the Azure. He financed it with mezzanine debt at a variable interest rate, expecting to pre-sell the penthouses to tech executives. But the tech sector is laying off thousands, and interest rates just hiked. William Hastings smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. You want to watch him bleed out? No, William, Donna replied softly, looking out the window at the Seattle skyline. I want to buy the blood bank. Over the next 6 months, Donna Caldwell vanished from the world she once knew. She didn't buy a mansion. She didn't buy a yacht. Instead, she quietly purchased the entire Ballard apartment building she was living in, renovating the top floor into a secure, state-of-the-art command center, while letting the other tenants live rent-free. She poured millions into stealth philanthropic ventures, funding battered women's shelters and paying off the medical debts of strangers. And behind the impenetrable shield of the Harrison Vanguard Trust, she watched Richard Sterling slowly drown. Richard was unraveling. The absence of Donna in his life hadn't just removed his emotional punching bag. It had removed his safety net. His new wife, Chloe, had immediately demanded a lavish, $1 million wedding in Lake Como, followed by a gut renovation of the Mercer Island estate to erase the old energy. Richard, desperate to maintain the illusion of absolute success, had funded it all on credit. But the Azure project was a catastrophic failure. Construction had stalled due to supply chain issues. The primary lenders were panicking, and the mezzanine debt, a brutal, high-interest loan designed for short-term bridging, was about to mature. Richard needed $80 million in cash, or the bank would seize the building, his company, and the Mercer Island home he had put up as collateral. Donna knew all of this because she now owned the bank's debt. The rain returned to Seattle in November, carrying a bitter chill that mirrored the atmosphere inside the boardroom of Sterling Development Group. Richard Sterling looked like a ghost of the man who had sat in Arthur Pendleton's office just 8 months prior. The Tom Ford suits hung loosely on his frame. His eyes were bloodshot, and a permanent sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead. He paced frantically at the head of the table, screaming at his chief financial officer, Jonathan Pierce. "What do you mean they sold the debt?" Richard roared, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table. "You told me Pacific Standard Bank was willing to negotiate an extension." Jonathan ran a hand over his face, looking utterly defeated. "They were, Richard, but a private equity firm swooped in yesterday and bought the entire $80 million note at a premium. They paid cash. Pacific Standard couldn't refuse." Who bought it?" "A firm called Harrison Vanguard Capital," Jonathan read from a heavily redacted file. "They're a ghost ship, Richard. No public board, no faces. Just a Delaware P.O. box and a team of vicious corporate lawyers. And they are calling the loan in today." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. If the loan was called in, he was finished. Bankruptcy, liquidation. Chloe would leave him the second the Bentley was repossessed. The humiliation would be absolute and public. Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. Donna had once quoted that to him when he mercilessly crushed a rival developer. He had laughed in her face. He wasn't laughing now. "Call them," Richard demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "Get whoever runs this Vanguard firm on the phone. Offer them equity in the Azure. Offer them a seat on my board. Do whatever it takes to get me in a room with the CEO." 20 miles away, in her heavily secured minimalist penthouse in Ballard, Donna sat in front of a bank of monitors. Her phone buzzed. It was William Hastings. "He took the bait, Donna," William said, his tone thick with amusement. "His CFO is begging for a meeting. They are offering 40% equity in the company just to restructure the debt." Donna took a sip of her black coffee. "Deny the equity offer. Tell them Harrison Vanguard Capital is only interested in a complete, hostile takeover of Sterling Development Group, including the surrender of all personal collateral. He'll lose his mind." "Let him," Donna said coldly. "Then, tell them our CEO will meet him in person tomorrow at 10 a.m. to sign the surrender documents. Tell him to bring his lawyer. I want Arthur Pendleton there to witness it." The next morning, the air in the executive conference room of Sterling Development Group was thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard and his bulldog attorney, Arthur Pendleton, sat at the table. Richard had dressed meticulously, putting on his best power suit and his platinum Rolex, desperately trying to project strength he didn't possess. At exactly 10 a.m., the heavy glass doors to the boardroom opened. David Roth walked in first, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He was followed by William Hastings and two silent, broad-shouldered security personnel. Richard immediately stood up, plastering on his trademark charismatic smile, though it looked brittle. "Gentlemen, I am Richard Sterling. I appreciate you taking the time to save the pitch, Mr. Sterling," David Roth interrupted, not offering his hand. He placed the briefcase on the table and popped the latches. "We are not here to negotiate. We are here to execute the transfer of your assets to our CEO." Richard bristled, his ego flaring despite his desperate situation. "I don't sign over my life's work to emissaries. If your CEO wants my empire, he can look me in the eye and take it himself." "I agree," a quiet, familiar voice echoed from the hallway. The blood froze in Richard's veins. He recognized that voice. It was the voice that used to remind him to take his blood pressure medication, the voice that used to quietly encourage him when he was a nobody, trying to flip cheap duplexes. Donna walked into the boardroom. She wasn't wearing the plain wool skirts or oversized sweaters of her past. She wore a perfectly tailored, charcoal grey Alexander McQueen suit that commanded absolute authority. Her posture was impeccable, her gaze as sharp and unforgiving as cut diamonds. She walked past her lawyers and stood at the head of the table directly opposite Richard. Arthur Pendleton's jaw literally dropped. His pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. Richard staggered backward, knocking his chair over. He stared at Donna, his mind completely failing to process the reality in front of him. "Donna," he choked out, his voice high and thin. What are you doing here? How did you get past security?" Donna slowly pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down, crossing her legs. She looked at Richard not with anger, but with the cold, clinical detachment of a scientist observing a dying insect. "Hello, Richard," Donna said, her voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "I believe you owe me $80 million, and I am here to collect." For a full, agonizing 2 minutes, the only sound in the sprawling executive boardroom was the erratic, shallow wheezing of Richard Sterling's breath. The silence stretched so taut it felt as though the floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Seattle skyline might spontaneously shatter inward. The ambient hum of the HVAC system provided a low, indifferent soundtrack to the sudden, violent decapitation of a real estate empire. Richard stood entirely frozen, his hand still hovering over the back of the heavy leather chair he had just knocked to the floor. His eyes, usually sharp, predatory, and brimming with unearned confidence, were wide, white-rimmed, and utterly uncomprehending. He looked at Donna, standing calmly at the head of his table. Then his gaze darted wildly to David Roth, to the stoic William Hastings, and finally to the two towering security personnel flanking the frosted glass doors. His brain scrambled frantically for a logical foothold, a rational explanation, and found absolutely nothing. Richard's deeply ingrained narcissism simply would not allow him to process the visual data His eyes were feeding him. The woman he had treated as a domestic accessory, a convenient punching bag for his own insecurities, was currently holding an $80 million guillotine blade directly over his neck. "This is a stunt," Richard finally spat, his voice cracking, lacking its usual booming theatrical resonance. He turned to his bulldog lawyer, Arthur Pendleton, who was currently staring at a digital copy of the Vanguard file on his tablet. Pendleton's face had drained of all color, taking on the waxy, grayish hue of a corpse. "Arthur, call building security and tell them to get the hell out of my boardroom," Richard demanded, his volume rising as panic began to override his shock. He pointed a trembling finger at Donna. "She doesn't have $80 million. This is a pathetic, desperate joke. She drives a 10-year-old sedan. She fixes broken dining chairs in a damp basement in Ballard. I gave her $150,000 in the settlement, and she was lucky to get it." Donna did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply pulled out the high-backed executive chair at the head of the table, his chair, and sat down, crossing her legs with the elegant grace of a monarch taking her throne. "I drove that sedan, Richard, because you insisted we needed the lease on the Range Rover to project an aura of success to your mezzanine lenders," Donna said, her tone carrying a terrifying, clinical detachment. "I worked in a basement because you refused to let my antique restoration tools clutter your pristine, staging-ready garage. I took the settlement because I wanted to be entirely, legally, and permanently rid of you. I walked away with exactly what you believed I was worth. But as you loved to preach at your networking seminars, business is simply about discovering the hidden value in distressed assets." Richard slammed both hands down onto the mahogany table, leaning forward, his face flushing a dangerous, mottled purple. "Where did you get the money, Donna? Did you steal from the company? Have you been embezzling from my accounts and hiding it offshore during our marriage? Because if you did, I swear to God I will call the SEC. I will drag you back to federal court so fast your head will spin. I'll have you locked in a federal penitentiary. Mr. Sterling, I strongly suggest you lower your voice and monitor your accusations," David Roth interrupted. The Canadian lawyer's voice was as cold and sharp as a scalpel. He stepped forward, opening his thick leather briefcase. "My client, the sole beneficiary and executor of the Harrison Vanguard Trust, acquired her capital through a perfectly legal, heavily vetted, and internationally sanctioned leasing agreement. There is no embezzlement. There are no hidden marital funds." Roth pulled a thick, cream-colored document from his briefcase and slid it precisely to the center of the table. It was a copy of an old, frayed property deed. "The capital," Roth continued, "was generated through the exclusive leasing of the mineral rights attached to the Blackwood Tract in the northern sector of the Canadian Shield, a 4,000-acre property inherited entirely from her late father, Harrison Caldwell. A property that you, Mr. Sterling, explicitly dismissed in probate as worthless frozen mud." Richard froze. The air left his lungs in a sharp hiss. The memory hit him with the blunt force trauma of a physical blow. He remembered that old, tattered deed. He remembered standing in Donna's deceased father's chaotic, cluttered study, mocking the old man's lifelong obsession with geological anomalies. He remembered Donna tentatively asking if they should pay the meager $300 annual property tax to the Canadian government to keep the land in her name. He had literally laughed in her face, ordered his assistant to shred the international tax notices, and told Donna to let the state seize it because her father was a delusional failure. "Lithium and neodymium, Richard," Donna said quietly into the heavy silence. "The largest, highest grade, unmined vein ever discovered in the Northern Hemisphere. My father wasn't crazy. He wasn't a failure. He was just 30 years too early. And the international consortium that leased those extraction rights from me 3 months ago paid a very, very handsome signing bonus to secure their supply chain." "A bonus?" Richard choked out, his eyes glued to the copy of the deed. "How much?" William Hastings, the Goldman Sachs wealth manager, offered a thin, predatory smile. The initial liquid injection to the Vanguard Trust was $120 million USD, with projected annual royalties exceeding $90 million for the next 3 decades. Richard staggered backward as if he had been shot. $120 million in cash, and billions on the horizon. His mind reeled. The Azure high-rise, the project that was currently destroying his life and driving him into ruin, was only worth a fraction of what Donna had made with a single signature. But then, the survival instinct of a cornered animal kicked in. Richard's eyes lit up with a sudden, desperate, greedy fire. He looked at Arthur Pendleton. "Arthur, listen to me," Richard yelled, slamming the table again. "She acquired the asset during our marriage. The surveys were done while we were legally bound. Washington is a community property state. Any asset realized, even an inheritance if the value was obscured or commingled, is subject to equitable distribution. Half of that mine belongs to me. She hid the true value during the discovery phase of the divorce. File an injunction right now. Freeze Vanguard Capital." Arthur Pendleton did not move. He did not reach for his tablet. He simply slowly removed his expensive, tortoiseshell reading glasses, his hands trembling so violently he nearly dropped them. He looked at his client not with the fiery determination of a defense attorney, but with the hollow pity of a priest delivering last rites. "Richard," Pendleton whispered, his voice cracking, We can't touch her money. We can't touch the trust." "What do you mean we can't touch it?" Richard roared, spit flying from his lips. "It's marital property. I'm entitled to half." "Because of the decree, Richard," Pendleton said, his voice dropping to a defeated murmur. "The decree I drafted. The decree you relentlessly insisted upon rushing through the courts." Pendleton tapped the screen of his tablet, pulling up the finalized divorce documents from 8 months prior. He spun the tablet around so Richard could see it. "You demanded a clean break, absolute waiver," Pendleton explained, squeezing his eyes shut, as if the words physically pained him. "You were terrified she would come after the future, projected profits of the Azure project once it was completed. You wanted a total, impenetrable firewall between your future wealth and her. To get that, I had to draft Section 4, Clause 12. Donna leaned forward, folding her hands neatly on the table. "Would you like me to quote it for you, Richard? I have it memorized." Richard stared at her, utterly paralyzed. "Both parties hereby irrevocably waive any and all rights, claims or interests to any undiscovered, unrealized, or future assets, inheritances, mineral rights, or real properties attached to the familial estates of either party," Donna recited, her voice smooth as glass. "This waiver is absolute and designed to ensure neither party may lay claim to wealth generated or discovered post-separation, regardless of when the underlying asset was initially acquired." The crushing, suffocating irony of his own malicious arrogance finally settled heavily over Richard's shoulders, pressing him down until his knees gave out. He sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. He had demanded that clause. He had mocked Donna as she signed it. He had built a massive, impenetrable legal fortress to keep Donna out, completely unaware that he was locking himself alone inside a burning building while handing her the only key to the vault. "You owed Pacific Standard Bank $80 million to bridge the gap on the Azure," William Hastings stated, breaking the silence as he slid a thick stack of legal demands across the table. "You defaulted. Your lenders panicked. Vanguard Capital swooped in and purchased that distressed debt at a premium. It is entirely legal, and it is entirely binding. We are the primary creditors of Sterling Development Group, and we are calling the loan in immediately." Richard looked up, his eyes bloodshot, tears of sheer panic welling in the corners. The facade was completely gone. The titan of Seattle real estate was reduced to a terrified, bankrupt boy. "I don't have $80 million, Richard whispered, his voice broken. "You know I don't. The supply chain delays. The interest hikes. I'm over-leveraged. I have barely $1 million in liquid cash. If you call this loan, I'm finished. The bank seizes the company. They seize Mercer Island. I am well aware of your financial anatomy, Richard, Donna said softly. I balanced your books for 10 years. Donna, please, Richard begged, all the fight draining out of him. Chloe, the media, the investors. If I go into Chapter 7, I'll be investigated. I'll lose everything. Please, don't do this. You have exactly 2 choices today, Richard, Donna said, her voice devoid of any pity or malice. It was just business. Choice 1, I walk out of this room, and Vanguard Capital forces Sterling Development into immediate Chapter 7 involuntary bankruptcy. I seize the company assets, I seize the Mercer Island estate you stupidly put up as collateral, and I let the local media publish every humiliating, agonizing detail of your financial ruin. The federal bankruptcy judges will tear apart your ledgers, and they will find the company funds you misappropriated to pay for Chloe's wedding in Lake Como. You will face criminal fraud charges. Richard let out a strangled sob, covering his mouth. And choice 2, he rasped. Choice 2, Donna said, her gaze locking onto his, pinning him to the chair. You sign the surrender agreement sitting in front of you. You walk away today with nothing but the tailored suit you are wearing and the meager cash currently sitting in your personal checking account. I take the company, the Mercer Island house, and the debt. I absorb the liabilities. I let you keep your illusion of dignity in public by framing it as an early retirement buyout, and you disappear. You're taking my house? Richard whispered, the reality of his total destitution washing over him. Where am I supposed to go? Donna stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. She looked down at the man who had stolen a decade of her life, feeling remarkably light. Buy yourself a nice little condo in the suburbs, Richard, Donna said, returning the exact words he had used to discard her 8 months ago. Focus on a little hobby. The scratching of Richard's Mont Blanc pen against the heavy, cotton-pressed surrender documents sounded entirely different than it had 8 months prior. Back in Arthur Pendleton's office, the sound had been a swift, arrogant dismissal of a decade-long marriage. Today, in the suffocating silence of the boardroom, the erratic, halting scrawl of his signature was the sound of a man signing his own professional death warrant. His hand shook so violently that he dropped the pen twice. When he finally pushed the papers across the mahogany table toward Donna, he didn't look up. He couldn't. Within 48 hours, the sterile, ruthless efficiency of Vanguard Capital's legal team dismantled Richard's life with surgical precision. There was no grace period. A private security detail from Pinkerton arrived at the sprawling Mercer Island estate on Thursday morning. Richard and his young wife, Chloe, were given precisely 4 hours to pack their personal belongings, clothing and sentimental items only. No art, no furniture, no jewelry purchased with company funds. The reality of the situation hit Chloe not in the driveway of the estate, but at a Nordstrom in downtown Seattle later that afternoon, when Richard's American Express black card was brutally declined. Realizing that the multi-millionaire real estate titan she had married was now entirely destitute, stripped of his equity, and facing massive social exile, Chloe's exit was as swift as it was cruel. She filed for an expedited annulment on Monday morning, citing fraudulent misrepresentation of lifestyle and assets. Richard didn't even have the funds to hire a lawyer to contest it. He moved into a dark, cramped, basement-level apartment in Tukwila, right under the deafening flight path of SeaTac Airport. The man who had once graced the cover of Seattle Business Monthly was now a ghost. He attempted to leverage his old contacts, applying for senior project management roles at major firms like Vulcan Real Estate and Skanska. But the corporate world is small, and the truth of his downfall had spread like wildfire. He was universally blacklisted, a toxic asset, a cautionary tale of a man who had flown too close to the sun on wings made of leveraged debt. Donna, however, did not move back into the Mercer Island mansion. She stepped inside only once after Richard's eviction. Walking through the cavernous, echoing halls, she felt no sense of triumph, only a profound, suffocating coldness. The house had never been a home. It had been a museum dedicated to Richard's ego. Instead of selling it, Donna executed a masterstroke of philanthropy that sent shockwaves through the Pacific Northwest. She transferred the deed of the $30 million property to Mary's Place, a highly respected, real-world Seattle organization dedicated to helping women and families reclaim their lives after escaping domestic abuse and financial ruin. Funded entirely by the quiet, inexhaustible revenue stream flowing from the frozen ground of the Canadian Shield, the estate was gutted and transformed. The wine cellars became playrooms. The sprawling master suites were partitioned into safe, warm, fully furnished transitional apartments. She named it the Harrison Sanctuary, after her father. Simultaneously, Donna took absolute control of Sterling Development Group. Her first act as CAO was to ceremoniously fire Arthur Pendleton and the entire toxic, sycophantic executive board Richard had installed. In their place, she elevated Sarah Jenkins, the junior lawyer who had bravely begged her not to sign the original divorce papers, to the position of chief legal officer. They rebranded the company to Vanguard Urban Restoration. Donna immediately halted the aggressive, superficial marketing of the Azure high-rise in Bellevue. The project had been designed as a playground for tech billionaires, a monument to excess. Donna sat down with her architects and completely redrew the blueprints. The Azure was reborn as a mixed-use sustainable complex. The top floors were converted into subsidized, high-quality apartments specifically reserved for Seattle's public school teachers, nurses, and municipal workers who had been entirely priced out of the city. The ground floor was offered rent-free to local, independent businesses that had been crushed by corporate gentrification. It was a massive financial loss on paper, but to Donna, backed by the billion-dollar yield of the Blackwood Tract, it was the most profitable investment of her life. Despite her newfound status as one of the wealthiest, most powerful women in the Pacific Northwest, Donna remained a ghost to the public. She maintained her absolute anonymity behind the labyrinth of Vanguard's blind trusts. She still lived in her second-floor walk-up in Ballard. She still drank cheap black drip coffee from the corner bodega. And most importantly, she kept her small antique restoration shop open. It was there, among the smell of sawdust, linseed oil, and aging brass, that Donna truly found her peace. She realized that her heart had always belonged to the quiet, meticulous art of taking broken, discarded things and bringing them back to life, and it was in that shop, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, that the heavy brass bell above the door chimed. Donna wiped her hands on her canvas apron and walked out from the back room. Standing at the counter was a man she had never seen before. He had warm, crinkling eyes, flour dusted on the sleeves of his flannel shirt, and a gentle, self-deprecating smile. "Hi," he said, his voice deep and easy. "I'm Thomas. I run the new bakery down the street. I was hoping you could help me. I found this at an estate sale, and it's completely shattered, but I think it has potential." He carefully placed a beautiful but deeply fractured 19th century French mantel clock on the counter. The glass was cracked, the gears were jammed, and the gold leaf was flaking away. "Most people told me to just throw it out," Thomas said, running a hand through his hair. "They said it wasn't worth the cost of fixing, but I hate the idea of giving up on something just because it's been damaged." Donna looked at the clock, tracing the intricate, broken lines of the casing with her calloused fingertips. Then she looked up at Thomas. For the first time in a decade, the heavy, defensive armor around her heart felt perfectly, wonderfully unnecessary. There was a quiet, undeniable spark in the room, a sudden, vibrant promise that the second half of her life wasn't just about rebuilding a corporate empire, but about allowing herself to be cherished. "They were wrong," Donna smiled softly, pulling the clock closer to her. "It just needs someone who understands how to put the pieces back together. I can absolutely help you." As the rain fell softly against the windows of the shop, Donna Caldwell finally realized the greatest fortune she possessed wasn't the billions of dollars buried beneath the Canadian ice. It was her own enduring, unbreakable spirit, ready to write an entirely new, beautiful story. Donna Caldwell's journey from a dismissed, discarded wife to a silent titan of industry remains a masterclass in the quiet architecture of power and the resilience of the human heart. She never sought revenge through explosive malice. Instead, she allowed her ex-husband's own blinding arrogance and greed to become the precise instruments of his downfall. By weaponizing the very legal documents designed to oppress her, Donna reclaimed not only her father's legacy, but her total autonomy. Ultimately, the billions flowing from the Blackwood Tract did not corrupt her. The wealth simply amplified the deep well of empathy she had always possessed, allowing her to forge new, genuine connections built on mutual respect rather than transactional power. Richard Sterling lost his empire because he only valued the superficial reflection in the mirror, while Donna built a magnificent new world because she understood the profound, earth-shattering value of the things and the people hidden beneath the surface.